Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I'm so grateful you could join me today. I have a really fun card project that I'm going to be sharing and walking you through today that's based on this card that I created a couple weeks ago. But I wanted to change up the design a little bit and try something new, use some of the new cardstocks from Gina K and some of the new colors in the palette. So just kind of flipping the design around and doing something different. I'm going to be using this stamp set called Thank You Friend. That's a new release from Gina. And I really like this stamp, the sentiment actually. Friendship is about who came and never left your side. So I'm going to use that instead of the she believes she could, so she did, that I did in the original design. And we'll see how that works out. I'm also going to be using the Hello Beautiful, my new stamp set, Hello Beautiful, with Gina K. And I'm going to use some of the bits and baubles from it, and definitely all of the flowers from this stamp set. So here are the inks that I'm going to be using for today's project. I'm using Tangerine Twist, Coral Reef, Key Lime. I love this color. I have Jelly Bean Green here. I'm also going to be using Sea Glass, and I am using the new Amalgam ink. I'm super excited about that. I'm going to be watercoloring a flower with that. And these three are some of my favorites in the Gina K palette. I have, of course, the Jelly Bean Green sitting here. And I have Bubblegum Pink and Passionate Pink. That's like my favorite pink in the entire line. So let's get started. Two more inks. I'm not sure which one I'm going to use, but I've got Wild Dandelion here and I have Sweet Corn. And I wasn't sure which tone of yellow I wanted to use right away. So I have a Copic multi-liner here that I'm going to be using for a little bit of doodling, and a water brush just to do some quick watercoloring. I also am going to be sharing and introducing these two products. I have some P.H. Martin's Radiant watercolors, and I'm also using some of this acrylic ink from Dollar Rowney. And I'm going to be using that to kind of tone down some of my watercolor looks to make things a little bit more opaque. So I'll really get into that technique when I go to do the flower. Okay, so instead of using the blue cardstock that I used on the right, I am going to be using a piece of the Coral Reef cardstock cut to an A2 sized card. So that's the card front there is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So it's you know, just a standard A2 size card. In the new Coral Reef color. So I really like that orange tone color. It's got a little bit of red in it, and I think it'll be a nice contrast with the pinks and the yellows that I want to use in the heart-shaped masking portion of the design. Okay, so I cut a mask from a piece of Eclipse paper based on a drawing that I did for the heart. So, and it's kind of a wonky heart, but I cut a mask and then I cut out the center portion of the mask so that I could lay the mask on top of my piece of cardstock and begin stamping inside. So I'm going to be using the flowers from the Hello Beautiful stamp set and using some of the other bits and baubles from that part of the set as well. But I'm just going to here, and I've sped up the video a little bit so that you could see the technique. But the intention here is to use the stamps, use some of the flowers in the stamp set, and ink them up with different colors, and stamp inside of the heart. And it's going to look like a hot mess because there's going to be a lot of overlapping of color and a lot of overlapping of stamps, and it looks like it's everywhere. But remember, I have that mask sitting right on the piece of cardstock that's going to go on the card front. So I'm intentionally trying to layer different stamps between the silhouette stamps and the open line stamps, and using the different colors in the palette, just kind of creating a patterned paper look inside of that heart. I'm finishing up the inside of this mask and adding a little bit of sea glass to just add a little bit of blue to the inside of the heart. And I use the silhouette stamp from the Hello Beautiful set. And I'm getting ready to peel away the mask. So hopefully, you know, every time I make a mask, I try to be gentle with it so that I can use it again next time. That never seems to work out. Sometimes I even rip them before I even get to use them. But at least I got a nice, good use out of it. And, you know, it looked really good. So now I'm going to take the inside of the mask that was cut away from creating the outside of the heart. And I'm going to lay that portion of the mask on top of the heart piece that I have already stamped. So this is going to give me the ability to add color and add all the stamp features and all the things that I want to lay in around the outside of the stamp. So I'm going to start first by adding a little bit of the sea glass in around the edges of the heart. And I'm using this, you know, Distress Ink dauber, and I'm going to add some of the sea glass ink. Now, I'll tell you folks, people, I am a little bit challenged when it comes to this distress, you know, this technique. I tend to practice it. I do a really good job in practicing, but inevitably, when I start to take it to my actual piece of cardstock, I always make a boogered up spot right away. And of course I did it again when I started to do this. So I tend to get an intense amount of color down there. But what I really like about water-based mediums, and if you're using a distress ink with this, the same thing applies. You can take a little bit of a water brush, and you're going to see me do that in a few minutes. I'm going to take a water brush and I'll end up just kind of spreading out that color or smoothing it out in those places where I've got that impression from the Distress Ink dauber. So I'm going to go ahead, and of course I've got that little boogered up spot right there. I'm going to go ahead and take the water brush and just kind of blend that out a little bit. Not heavy duty on the water, because this is a piece of Gina K white cardstock, and it will, if you put too much water on it, it's going to pill it up. So I just kind of brushed a little bit of water on it just to kind of blend it out a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with stamping some of the foliage around the outside of the heart here. And this is going to look like a hot mess because of the mask that's sitting on top. So, and it does totally look like I'm randomly stamping, but I am just trying to get some of the foliage in some strategic places so that it looks like it's kind of popping out of the heart. And I'm using Jelly Bean Green, and I'm also using Key Lime to add these elements in from the Hello Beautiful stamp set. I'm also going to be adding in the splatter stamp from the Hello Beautiful stamp set, and I'm going to be using the sea glass for that to just get a nice little pop of blue color happening that kind of reinforces that blue color that was used on the inside of the heart mask. So here you go. I'm just popping it right in here and just kind of adding a little watercolor splatter look to it with this stamp. Now it's time to peel off the mask and get a good look at what the whole composition of the design is. And I wanted to try to keep this mask, but you can see I boogered it up. So there's a little bit that stuck to it, probably because the paper was a little bit wet when I laid that mask down. But I really dig it. So you can really get good definition and see what's on the inside of the heart and all of those flowering, blooming foliage pieces that are flying outside of the heart. Okay, so now it's time to move on to the embellishment that I'm going to paint. And I stamped the embellishment, the largest flower in the stamp set, using this Amalgam ink, jet black Amalgam ink from Gina K, and it is super duper waterproof, perfect for watercoloring. It's becoming my fast favorite. I am using some of this Dr. P.H. Martin's Radiant Watercolors. I love these, and I'm going to be using these. I've been using them for years, but I really, really love them, and I started reintroducing them back into my paper crafting projects, so I want to share them with you today. So I'm using the Radiant Watercolors, and I'm also using this acrylic ink. And what I want to show you here is that the Radiant Watercolors are super, super vibrant, and they're very, very, very transparent. And I wanted to just kind of change it up a little bit with the painting of this flower to create more of an ombre look, sort of like a smoothie blend ombre between the pink and the yellow in this bloom. So I've put a little bit of this acrylic ink down on my craft mat here, and I'm going to add it to the pink color, the rose color, so that I create that new color there, which is a very, very faint pink, and it's more opaque. So I'm just kind of painting it across the entire flower to create my base of color. And I'm going to let that dry in between. And you'll notice that the amalgam ink didn't even move. So there's no cross-contamination between the stamped image and the color medium that I'm putting on top. And that's the beauty of the amalgam ink. It's just amazing. Okay, so once I've let the flower dry, I've gone back in with some of the rose Radiant Watercolors from P.H. Martin's, and I'm just layering some of that color on top. So the base color that I have underneath is very opaque. So when I start to put some of the Radiant Watercolor on top, I'm not getting the base color coming through. There's no translucency there. So I have diminished the amount of transparency that's happening with these watercolors because I've added acrylic ink to the mix. Now, some alternatives to the method that I'm using here are to just go ahead and use acrylic paint and water it down with your water brush, or you can use some gouache paint. Gouache paint is the type of watercolor medium that is more opaque and less translucent. So I really, really, really like the way this flowers turn out. I decided to go ahead and take a little bit of the acrylic ink and kind of dab it in towards the middle portion of the flower while the paper was still wet. So what that's going to do is going to lay on top of the watercolor, the rose watercolor there, and further kind of make it opaque and kind of tone down its translucency. So the purpose of doing all of this for this flower was so that that flower had that ombre look and was kind of muted, and the center portion of the heart in the card really is the portion that shines. So I haven't assembled the card, but I kind of put the flower in position so that you could see how it works in the composition of the design. But what I need to do next is add a little bit of dimension between the heart image in the middle and all of the foliage that's going on around the outer edge. And also just kind of clean up some of the areas where the mask was just a little bit off. So I'm using my Copic multi-liner and just kind of doodling a heart around the edge and going back around twice. And this kind of enables me to cover up some of the areas that were kind of clipped by the mask, but it also creates that level of definition in the design. So it helps give a little more clarity to where the heart is in the design and where the foliage is, and just helps out the overall composition. So I went ahead and just put a little adhesive on the back and adhered it to the piece of coral reef, and just kind of positioned the flower down where I'd like to see it. Added a little bit of wet glue to the back of it and put it on the card and put it in position. And now comes the tricky part for me. I wanted to use that sentiment, but I was really, really unsure of stamping it over top of my complete composition. And I was right. I put it on a bit of cardstock and kind of trimmed it down to a really small rectangle and laid that whole portion over top of the heart so that I could get that sentiment. I really wanted to use that sentiment, but I really felt it was too light to just put it on the card. So you can see here the difference. in the 2 sentiments. The sentiment over on the right was a little bit more bolder and thicker, so it really could hold its weight in the design. But the sentiment on the left, which I really wanted to use, was a little bit thinner, and I had to come up with a different idea for it. I really love the way this card turned out. Here's the final card, and it was the first time I had ever laid a sentiment over top of something that I designed, and I was a little nervous about it, but I really like the way it turned out, and I think it's my friend's really gonna love it. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.